Are you ready for a traditional superhero story about some patriotic milquetoast in tights? Well, then too bad, because that is far from the kind of superhero that's the hero of this story. This is a story about people who are like everybody despite their powers, of course. It's about very flawed people, who the world fucked over again and again. But first let's take a peek at what happens in this world to what happens to the supposed superheroes. In the year 2000, a world that has many similarities to ours, but plenty of differences, the biggest being, this world had something that someone might recognize out of a comic book. The only difference is, in comics, the good guys always win. The same can't be said about this world. In a New York City mall of around 1,000 to 2,000 people, about 30 men wearing ski masks and slick black armor came storming in with large guns. The people inside started to get in a panic as the men fired off into the crowd of people as they tried to escape. The wall behind the men came crashing down, and behind it was a group of people dressed in all colorful costumes and were wearing bright colored masks, like superheroes. A woman dressed in red threw out her hand and a ball of fire shot out of it at the men in black. The men quickly spread out, seemingly trying to escape her attack. They all lifted their guns at the group of colorfully dressed superheroes. The woman in red flew into the air trying to keep the bullets fired at her as she flew away, rather than her teammates, giving her teammates the time to get the upper hand. They all started to get into a brawl as those in costumes were trying to protect those who couldn't, but as hard as they tried, the men in black gunned them all down until only the woman in red was all that remained. She tried to fly away, but she was shot in the leg, making her fall on the ground in agony. They surrounded her and pointed their guns at her head, as she laid there with her leg bleeding. One of the men kicked her in the stomach as hard as he could, and said, "Look what we have here, the all-powerful, almighty Inferno woman." She looked around at her teammates' dead bodies, she looked at the man in shock and tried to ask howdy. But before she could finish speaking, he fired a bullet into her stomach, making her flop on her back in a pool of her own blood, staining the mall tile floor, as her mask flung off from the impact. He then stood over top of her, getting his shoes soaked in her blood as he informed her dead body, "It was nothing personal. It just had to be done." He then fired one last bullet into her chest, just to make sure he finished the job. Inferno woman's blood splashed over his mask as he smiled behind it, and it was at this moment that everything had changed. You see these colorful dressed men and women, they are ... They were this world's superheroes, and this was the day the bad guys won. Now I think we meet our main character, our leading lady, our brave strong hero, the emotionally Brock ... Maybe it's better we just get into the story. Later the same day of the massacre at the mall, in a New York City apartment, a man was watching over his 6-year-old daughter, named Mari. They were watching TV. The man was sitting in a rocking chair as his little girl was playing with her toys on the floor in front of the TV, when a breaking news bulletin came on screen. The reporter said, "Today we are bringing you tragic news as a thought-to-be terrorist attack at the New York County Mall resulted in the deaths of this world's greatest heroes. We're at Tigger, the nuclear woman, battering ram, Sir Immortality, Agent Orange, and Inferno woman. These heroes were known as the exceptions. They protected us for the past 18 years. May we now honor them by having a moment of silence." The man didn't respect the reporter's wishes by muttering to himself, "Allison." The news report then panned back to the destruction at the mall. The camera then shifted to the bodies of the exceptions. The man looked to his daughter playing on the floor, as she overheard the news report and froze in place. When she could bring herself to move again, the little 6-year-old girl looked at the screen, while crawling up to it to watch to see all the dead bodies of the exceptions. But only one of them got her attention. That was Inferno woman's body that still had the pool of blood surrounding her, but now with bloody footsteps around the floor, from the man who shot her. The little girl just kept looking at this sight, not even paying attention to the reporter's voice talking about the incident, and even though she was only a 6-year-old, She felt more sadness looking at Inferno's woman's brutally murdered body than most adults feel in their entire life, and all the little girl had to say was one very simple word, that most 6-year-old kids know very well: mommy. Exactly 20 years later, that 6-year-old girl has now grown up to be a troubled 26-year-old woman. She still lives with her dad, in the same old apartment in New York. It's 6 a.m. in the morning and she's lying in bed, when the alarm clock on her nightstand next to her bed started to go crazy, easily waking her up. She sighs from how tired and annoyed she is. She reached over trying to hit snooze, but since she's exhausted, she isn't really paying attention, so she's hitting it over and over, but it wouldn't stop going off. It got to the point where she said fuck it. And the next time she hit the alarm clock, it was lit on fire, similar to how her mother had fire powers, but even that didn't stop the never-ending ringing. She quickly got out of bed, and as the whole table that the clock was on caught on fire, she panicked, saying shit. I was only trying to burn the clock, not my whole room. The fire alarm in the other room started to go crazy as well, but instead of acting concerned, she was just simply annoyed from not one but 2 alarms going off. She slowly opened her closet and pulled out a fire extinguisher that she kept in there just in case something like this happened. She pointed it at her nightstand and alarm clock, and sprayed the fire out, but not before both her table and clock were burned up and slightly melted. Her father then walked into the room after hearing the fire alarm. Knowing how his daughter is, he knew she was the cause. He had an anger expression upon his face once seeing the burns in her room. He explained to his daughter, Mari, you do this at least twice a week, you've gone through 15 alarm clocks. She defended herself this time. I made sure to keep this in my closet. As she held up the fire extinguisher, her dad told her, you need to stop abusing your power. Your mother would never use her powers the way you do. She would want you to be like her. She would want you to be a... Mari stopped him mid-sentence. I know, my mom would want me to be superhero, and I'm sorry, I just don't think that's my thing. I want a normal life, and I might not be a superhero, but I'm still hero. I'm a detective. Why can't you just proud of what I am, then disappointed in what I'm not? I just don't understand how you could be so reckless. You don't even seem to care. The only time you ever even use your powers is to burn down your room at 6 a.m. in the morning. Okay, let's stop arguing. The 5 of us are going to a charity event Ruby is hosting tonight, he explained. Mari brutally remarked, you know, for someone who says that they loved mom as much as you did, you seem to move on quickly. Her father, whose name was Thomas, wanted to bark back at her claim, but didn't, knowing that she could argue for hours. Mari added to her previous statement, I'm going to be late for work. Mari walked past him to leave her room so she could make a quick pot of coffee in the kitchen. She filled the pot with and placed it in on the heating plate. Mari wasn't expecting to see anyone, but her stepbrother Arlo was sitting at the kitchen table eating pancakes. He was a shy and quiet young adult, never made much conversation with anyone. Mari asked, how long have you been here? Just a few minutes before you started to talk bad about my mom, Arlo explained. Mari was about to apologize, but he told her, you don't have to. When Arlo was done munching on his pancakes, he pulled out his cell phone and started to watch a video on Native American communities near New York. On screen was a man named Silas Minerva, discussing how their culture was robbed from the community, still is to this day. Mari could tell Arlo wasn't the talkative type, so she went down to her car in the apartment parking lot, changed into her uniform in the car as she drove off on the way to work like she always does when she's running late, leaving Thomas there with Arlo, who was still in the kitchen. Her dad looked around her bedroom. He looked up at a poster above Mari's bed of the superhero team The Exceptions with her mother, Allison, also known as Inferno Woman, front and center of the group, while saying, Allison, I'm sorry but she won't listen to me. I'm sorry that our daughter is so ungrateful of who she is. Even though he very clearly had no clue who she was. A little while later, as Mari drove to work, she went by an old ratty billboard. of her mother and her team, with Allison in her red suit and mask, standing front in of the team with the rest of her team standing behind her as they stood in front of the Star-Spangled American flag. The billboard had tears and rips in it due to it being over 2 decades old. It had the words "Be Your Own Hero" written in big blue letters at the bottom. Mari took a moment to look at the billboard and stopped driving subconsciously. Mari's entire life was haunted by the fact she would never be as good as her mother in her father's eyes. No matter what she'd do, he was so hung up on the idea who she could be, he wasn't paying attention to the person she became, and with her mom dead, Mari didn't have anyone to really look up to. Even though it didn't make sense to her deep down, she wanted to be her mother, but at the same time didn't. Mari didn't want all the fame shit, with action figures of her, and movies made of her. She just wanted to help those in need, but with that came with a problem. How could she save someone else, when she herself needs saving? This quiet moment of self-pity would be interrupted once a car behind Mari had blown the horn. Mari had forgotten she stopped in the middle of the road as she was lost in the train of thought, and was now backing up traffic. She quickly put her foot on the gas and kept on her way. A half hour went by, and Mari got to the police department. She ran inside and went to her office. She sat down in her desk, looking over file copies that were on her desk of unsolved cases she had printed out the other day off her computer. She passed through them and opened one of a missing girl from Brooklyn. A fellow detective knocked on her office door. Mari told them to come in. A girl wearing a buttoned-up uniform walked into the room with a smirk on her face. Mari's attitude changed when she saw who it was, asking her, "Libby, what's the deal with your face?" in a sarcastic but friendly tone. Libby explained, "I was given the case of the murder of the exceptions." Mari wasn't expecting her to say that. She remarked, "Why are you even trying? It's a lost cause. Everyone who's tried has given up." The security cameras went offline and none of the witnesses saw the faces of the killers. Libby resented. The world needs something. It's been 20 years since they were killed. Ever since then everyone has been on edge. Maybe finding their killers could help give closure. You can tag along with me if you want, it could be fun. Mari felt slight guilt over Libby's statement, since Libby had no clue who Mari was, and although she wanted to tell her, she didn't know if she was ready yet. No one knows that Mari is the daughter of Inferno Woman but Mari herself and Thomas, but she tried to brush off this emotion as she held up the file of the missing girl, telling Libby, "No thank you, I'm already on a case." Libby wanted to keep their conversation going. "All right, any plans for tonight?" Libby asked. Mari explained to her, "Yeah, my dad and stepmom are having a charity event that I have to attend and I have to see my step-siblings who don't like me." Libby asked, "Why do you live with your dad when you have a good enough job to own your own place?" Mari, not wanting to give her the real answer, replied, "It's complicated." Libby could tell it was a touchy subject and changed the conversation, saying, "Do you mind if I tag along with you on your case? I feel like you don't want to be alone." Mari groaned, "Fine, and not because I don't want to be alone, but because you're a great cop." Mari flipped open the file and read about the case file to her. It says that she went missing last week, when she was going to school, but she didn't make it there, and witnesses say they heard a girl screaming 10 minutes after she left her house. Libby asked, "So she was kidnapped while walking to school?" Mari told her she wasn't walking, she was driving a red Toyota that went missing with her. Libby was surprised, shouting, "What?" Mari continued, "And her license plate was found on Amber Street, 30 blocks away from her house." Libby's mouth dropped, saying, "I'm already regretting this. Are there any suspects?" Mari said, "Her father is our prime suspect. He and her mother divorced before her birth. He has a criminal record of breaking and entering, not really kidnapping material, but his address is Amber Street 174. Ironic. We should go and pay him a visit." Libby told her, "But before we go we should probably ask a couple of those knuckleheads from downstairs if they can look over things to see if there's anything we missed." A half hour later, Mari and Libby drove to the missing girl's dad's address. They sat in the car in front of his house for a couple of seconds. Libby, who was in the passenger seat, asked Mari, who was in the driving seat, "So am I the bad cop?" Mari sarcastically remarked, "When have I been the good cop?" Libby took a moment to think and told her, "Yeah, you're right, I'm the good cop, and you're the bad cop." They reached for the car door handles and got out of the car in unison. They walked up to his doorstep with badges in hand and knocked on the door. A few seconds later the door opened. To the missing girl's father, he was a heavy middle-aged man. Mari showed him her badge and told him, "NYPD, we need to ask you some questions." He grunted and welcomed them in. Mari knew it must have been difficult for him, but she also knew by his reaction, something was up. They sat down in his living room across from one another. Mari told him, "I'm sorry this must be a difficult time for you, but it's just a few questions, let's begin." He agreed. Libby asked, "When was the last time you spoke to your daughter?" He told her, "About a few years ago after I lost custody." He started to tap his fingers on the desk next to him. Mari, noticing this, asked, "Are you okay? You seem tense." He snapped, "Of course I'm tense, my daughter is missing." His excuse didn't faze Mari. She told him, "Your daughter's car license plate was found on this street." He looked almost surprised to hear this, as if he didn't know, as he muttered quietly, "She was actually coming." Mari, not understanding the situation, asked, "What are you talking about? Coming here? Why did you lie to us?" He decided that he's lied to them enough, and that Mari clearly had caught on. Therefore he told them the truth. "I talked to her the morning before she went missing on the phone. It was the first time since I lost custody. I said that I wanted to see her, but she never came." Libby started to figure things out, saying, "So she wasn't on her way to school, she was coming to see you, and on the way here she went missing. Why didn't you tell us this before?" He told her, "Because I'm not allowed to see her or even talk to her." Mari didn't believe him, stating, "She's still your daughter. If you cared at all about her, you would have told us." The man begged, "Please trust me. It's the damn truth." Libby didn't add anything to the conversation topic, seeing how Mari seemed emotionally connected somehow. Mari looked at the man in his bright green eyes, as he pleaded for her to believe him. She told him, "Either you're a really good liar, or a shit parent. But either way, we're going to do everything we can to find your daughter." A vibrating buzz from Mari's pocket interrupted their feud. She reached into her pocket and took out her phone to see she was being called by one of the officers who she enlisted to help her. She quickly walked away from the group, telling them she'd be right back. She went outside the house to answer the call, not wanting the girl's father to listen in. The person on the other side of the call told Mari, "Officer Mari Murray, we've found Paula Holster's car." Paula Holsters was the name of the missing teenager. She quickly responded, "Where was it?" Having just promised to do whatever she had to do, to find Paula. They told her, "We used satellite tracking to track the vehicle from its GPS. I'm currently on the scene. It's parked in an abandoned parking lot on Warden Avenue. It has a huge dent in the passenger side." "No, Paula?" Mari asked, hoping for an obvious response, but her fellow officer stated, "No." Mari was disappointed but told him, "I'll be right there." Mari quickly hung up. She went back inside to Paula's father and Libby, talking more about the disappearance of his daughter. Libby could see on Mari's face that it was time to go, so stood up off of the sofa couch, asking, "What is it?" Mari explained, "They found Paula's car, let's go." As they were leaving, Mari turned around to the girl's father, who was still sitting on the couch depressed over her disappearance, and even though Mari didn't like him, she decided to say, "We'll find her. I promise." Something she's not meant to say. She's never ever supposed to make a promise she might not be able to keep in the line of duty. A half hour later they arrived at the crime scene, where they were greeted by the police officer who called them. He was standing in the middle of the parking lot in front of a busted-up car. Mari inspected the car. There were blood stains on the car seats. She opened the glove compartment and found the girl's schoolwork for her math class. At the top of the page, the girl had written her name in cursive and fancy with a heart next to it. Maury remembered back when she was little and did the same thing, as she took a deep breath and tried to shake off whatever she was feeling. She got out of the car, and Libby asked, "Are you doing okay?" Maury told her, "Yeah, it's just. Yeah. Back there, what you told that man, you know we can't tell someone that," Libby stated. Maury, although didn't want to get her to be upset with her, Maury still asked, "Which part?" as she genuinely didn't know if she meant her telling him how bad of a parent he is, or for promising to find his daughter. Libby responded, "Multiple actually. You see worse shit on a daily basis, why are you acting as if you know this girl?" Libby was close. Maury had never met Paula before, but she felt almost as if she had. She reminded her of herself. Libby asked, one last time since Maury didn't respond, "What's going on?" Maury couldn't tell, about how the reasons she feels connected to this girl is because Maury is the daughter of an actual fucking superhero, and her dad dislikes her being in this line of work because it's a waste of her abilities, or maybe she could tell her? Just get it over with already, she had to find out one day or another. Maury opened her mouth, prepared to tell Libby everything, when they then heard a gun go off. Libby and Maury looked around to see where it was coming from, only to see the cop next to them had a huge blood splat on his shirt. He fell on the concrete ground, having been killed from the gunshot wound. Libby knelt to check his pulse, but he was dead. Maury spotted a black van in the distance that had its side door open and 3 men with guns on the inside. They started to fire. Libby and Maury took cover behind Paula's car. Libby asked Maury while they crouched behind the car for cover, "Were you hit?" "No, you?" she asked. Libby shook her head no. The shooting then all of a sudden stopped. They couldn't hear any more gunfire coming from the men's direction. Maury peeked her head around the car and saw that they were pointing their guns at the gas tank on the car, instead at them. Maury knew exactly what they were intending to do. They pulled the trigger on their guns. Maury tried to push Libby out of the way, but it was too late as their bullets had hit the gas tank and the car blew up, throwing them both backwards. They landed a few feet apart from one another on the parking lot ground. The van then closed their doors and drove away, thinking they had killed Libby and Maury, but was mistaken. Maury raised her head off the concrete with a big slash on the side of her forehead. The world around her felt as if it had slowed down as smoke covered the area, blurring her vision. When she could finally see again, she saw a huge pit of fire where the car was. She raised out her hand and using her power the flames then absorbed into her. Maury felt slight discomfort from containing an open flame, being the reason why she doesn't do it often. Maury stated, "Libby, we gotta get out of here. I'll explain what just happened. I'm sure you have tons of questions." She got up from the ground to see Libby next to her laying down with a piece of shrapnel from the car in her shoulder. Libby spoke softly, "Are you okay?" Maury has seen crime scenes like this before. Maury knows what is considered a fatal blow. Any hit in the heart or near the blood vessels of your heart is a death sentence. Maury, in distress, went close to her friend and said, "Hey. You're gonna be okay. Okay?" Libby was brave, telling her, "You and I both know it's too late for me." Libby started to moan softly as her eyes started to close slowly. Maury tried to keep her up. "Libby? You're all right, I'll call an ambulance." Maury grabbed her phone from her pocket to see it was smashed from impact. Maury let out an emotional shriek, knowing that Libby is right. It was far too late. Maury no longer held back her tears, and started bawling, telling her, "I'm sorry. Libby. I'm so sorry." As she felt the same level of dread and sadness as she did when her mother died. Libby put out her arm and held Maury's hand, and said, "It's okay, Maury, it's okay." Maury felt as Libby's grip on her hand loosen until it was no longer there. Libby exhaled for the last time and didn't breathe back in. Maury shouted with tears running down her face, "Please. Don't leave me." As she leaned over top of Libby's body, started to pound on her chest, Hoping she could bring her back with CPR, Mari knew it was only a pipe dream. Libby wasn't coming back.